If you find yourself with a camera in your hand and want to learn how to use it, please subscribe to this channel, like the videos, comment below. Hi Photos family. Today we are wrapping up a discussion that we are using this week, or we are talking about this week, of mimicking shots and of photographs that we like in style, look, or feel. We've been using this photograph as an illustration of being able to reverse engineer, you might say, these photographs. Today we're talking about what is unseen. The unseen might be a dark shadow along one side. Excuse me. Why when I'm trying to record do I get the hiccups? So a darkening along one side might be a flag or intentionally creating a shadow. If it's darkening, for instance, I used an illustration as we were introducing this topic this week, my hand over here creating a shadow on my face, whereas if I pull up my hand away, there's a little bit of a reflected light over here from my reflector beside me. But in a photograph like this, the shadow in that case would be some sort of, in the studio where I worked, we called them flags. And it's reducing the amount of reflected light next to the object or next to the subject, so that the light is not as direct against the subject. To give you an illustration of what that looks like, we talked about the Buck Weaver baseball, and you can see here that there's some shadow over here, but there's not any shadow over here. And that, for that reason, is because the mirror that the baseball is placed on is acting as a reflector. So there's shadow over here, there's not shadow over here, but you can see there's very clearly a scalloped glass edge along that mirror. So you see the frame over here, and then you see there's a possible origin of light over there. So what does that tell you about the unseen of the photograph? It tells you that there's a reflector, a mirror. That's why you see the reflection of the baseball. But you also see that the blacks are very black. It's very deep. The shadows are very rich. There are some very dramatic highlights, like the highlight just above, or I guess in this sense it's a reflection just below the name Buck Weaver. That gives you some idea of how bright the whites are also. So what would that mean then for our exposure of shutter speed and ISO setting? Because the shadows are so deep and the highlights are so bright, that gives us an idea that the lights that are being used are some very bright to that setting. So that would put us very close to ISO 100 or ISO 125, and shutter speed of something much faster than 1/80th of a second. There's not any need to stop any motion, and so the faster the shutter speed, the less exposed, because the shutter doesn't have any lag time, so that it would leave the film or the sensor uncovered, giving a greater contrast to the subject. However, the subject is well lit enough that the lights that are used must have been very bright according to the sensitivity of the camera. So ISO we have set probably somewhere around 160 at the highest, shutter speed 100 at the fastest, maybe 125, but I kind of doubt that. How do I know that? I hear people talking about that and looking at photographs that they didn't shoot, and I'm going, you're just guessing, but that's a pretty good guess, because more than likely they're going to rough in the look of that shot that they're mimicking very well. I know personally, I never really shot these type of images with very slow shutter speed, because it was very hard to control the light in the studio. We did our very best to block any light that we weren't using, but there were a lot of other photographers around. There are other photographers around that were shooting with their cameras, and their flashes were going off. There was a lot of other light around that we wanted to control and prevent from entering our shot if at all possible. So that meant long shutter speeds were very difficult if at all possible. Because we were shooting indoors, we couldn't shoot without lights at all, because they still had to have some emergency lights on in case there was something that happened and people needed to get out quickly without being tripped up by anything on the floor. So, you know, environment and seeing the unseen behind it. How do we know the camera settings? And part of that is the contrast. If your shadows are very deep, if the blacks are showing very little to no detail, then there's a possibility of greater distance, number one, between whatever you're seeing in the reflection to not get any light, but also any shadows that you have in direct reflection that would not necessarily be showing reflection of anything at all. It's just shadow within the texture of the item. That's going to give you a better feel of what the ISO setting is. ISO setting 125 or ISO 100 are going to give you the darker, richer, deeper shadows. It's going to take more for light to expose those areas, but you also have an idea of the intensity of light with how bright some areas are on the baseball or reflected some other places, and the great contrast between bright highlight and deep shadow is going to give you an idea of, okay, there's intense light, but there's also a lack of sensitivity on the sensor as started by the film ISO rating. ISO 100, ISO 125 is going to give you those deeper, richer shadows. The intensity of light is going to give you greater highlights. Just because there's that much more light that the camera sensor is going to see and receive, those areas will be exposed and they will have a greater exposure rate, and they're going to appear much more white because there's so much more light coming in. And the shutter speed is simply just evidenced by any amount of shake that the camera may have, any amount of shake that the subject may experience on the set top. Is going to shake some. Most all camera shake and most all subject shake are going to be nearly fully reduced at 1/80th of a second. That's why I say that 1/80th of a second is a very good guess on the slowest shutter speed that a shot like this would be taken. Generally, 1/100th of a second is about the best most flashes, whether they have a tether cord or they're flashing by infrared or some other radio signal. Typically, anything faster for shutter speed, the lights are going to trigger at a slower rate to show the shutter coming back over the sensor. It's going to look very strange and odd that something either at the bottom or the top of your image is bright and looks good, but then it just kind of falls off and it goes gray and then eventually all black at the bottom. And so what that is your shutter is opening and closing so fast that the lights go off and then your shutter's already closing up. And so there's no or very little opportunity for the other half of your sensor to receive the other information, and it's going to gradate out to a black very quickly, and that's it looks so odd. But that has to do with the timing difference between the shutter speed and your studio strobes. Thankfully, there's not much of that issue when you're shooting outside because the sun is always shining. It never turns off. It doesn't strobe, thankfully. It is a constant but very bright light. So, thank you so much for watching, and give us a comment down below as to what you have learned and what you enjoyed about this video. Give us a thumbs up. We would love to share this information with other people also, And if you're not yet a subscriber, we would love to add you to our Photos family. Just click the subscribe button and turn the notification bell on. Thank you so much. God bless.